After 15 years working at the Department of Homeland Security as a threat analyst, I had seen patterns of behavior that most people would miss. My job was to identify potential domestic threats through behavioral analysis and data pattern recognition. The skills had served me well in my career, but I never expected to use them in my own neighborhood. The relocation to Pinewood Estates had been necessary after my promotion. The suburban community offered good schools, lower crime rates, and most importantly, better medical facilities for my daughter Emma. At 14, Emma had been living with muscular dystrophy for most of her life, requiring the use of a wheelchair for mobility. Despite her challenges, she maintained an infectious optimism that continually amazed me. Our new home in Pinewood Estates seemed perfect on paper. The wide hallways could accommodate Emma's wheelchair, and the single-story layout eliminated the need for a stair lift. The neighborhood boasted well-maintained common areas and a community pool with accessibility features. The only downside was the homeowners association, but I had dealt with bureaucracy my entire career. How difficult could a neighborhood HOA be? The first few weeks were peaceful. Neighbors brought welcome baskets and introduced themselves with polite smiles. Emma was thrilled with her new bedroom that overlooked a small garden where butterflies gathered around native flowering plants. My home office was set up in the spare room, allowing me to work remotely 3 days a week to accommodate Emma's medical appointments and needs. I first noticed Deborah Wilson during my morning runs. She walked the neighborhood with a clipboard, taking notes on properties that violated the community standards. Her gray hair was always perfectly styled, and she wore pressed slacks even in the summer heat. Neighbors would visibly straighten their posture when she approached. Some would hurry inside, avoiding interaction altogether. During the first neighborhood gathering, Deborah introduced herself as the HOA president. Her handshake was firm, her smile never reaching her eyes as she assessed my appearance. "Welcome to Pinewood," she said, glancing over my shoulder at Emma. "We have certain standards here that keep our property values high. I assume you have reviewed the community guidelines thoroughly." The issue with our front door became apparent during the first autumn rain. The hydraulic closer had been adjusted by the previous owners to shut quickly and firmly. Emma could not maneuver her wheelchair through the entrance before the heavy door would swing closed against her. The first time it happened, the door caught the wheel of her chair, nearly tipping her onto the concrete. That evening, I measured the door and researched ADA-compliant automatic door openers. The modification would be minimal: a small motor mounted above the door frame and a push button installed at wheelchair height. According to the HOA guidelines, all external modifications required board approval, so I completed the application forms with architectural drawings and specifications. I noticed Emma struggling more with the door as the weather grew colder. The metal handle became difficult for her to grip with her weakening hand strength. One evening, after watching her struggle for several minutes while I carried groceries, I made a decision. Emma deserved independence in her own home. The HOA approval was merely a formality for such a necessary modification. What reasonable person would object to a disabled teenager having safe access to her home? I had no way of knowing that this simple request would expose a darkness lurking beneath the manicured lawns and friendly facades of Pinewood Estates. Nor did I realize that Deborah Wilson would soon become the subject of the same analytical focus I usually reserved for potential threats to national security. The monthly HOA meeting was held in the community center, a modern building with uncomfortable folding chairs arranged in neat rows. Emma and I arrived early, taking a position near the front where she could easily see the proceedings. I carried a folder containing our application for the door modification, complete with manufacturer specifications, and a letter from Emma's doctor explaining the medical necessity. Residents filtered in slowly, nodding politely but keeping their distance. I recognized the pattern from my professional training, a community governed by fear rather than collaboration. The board members took their places at a long table facing the audience. Deborah Wilson sat in the center, a position of authority. When the meeting agenda reached new business, I raised my hand and was acknowledged. I approached the table, placing our application before each board member. Good evening. My name is Michael Lawson. My daughter Emma and I moved to Pinewood Estates 3 months ago. We are requesting approval for an ADA-compliant automat. Ike door opener for our front entrance. Emma uses a wheelchair, and the current door is too heavy for her to operate independently. Deborah glanced at the application, then at Emma, her lips pressing into a thin line. We have procedures for modifications, Mr. Lawson. This looks quite complicated and would certainly alter the aesthetic uniformity of the neighborhood. I maintained my professional demeanor. The motor mounts above the door frame, inside the existing trim. The only visible change would be a small activation button beside the door. It would have minimal visual impact while providing necessary accessibility. Deborah leaned forward. Necessary is subjective, is it not? Many residents have children with various needs, but they manage without special accommodations. Our architectural standards are what maintain property values in Pinewood Estates. A board member named Richard glanced at Emma, then back at the application. This seems reasonable to me. It is hardly visible and serves a legitimate purpose. Deborah shot him a sharp look before returning her attention to me. Perhaps you should have considered these issues before purchasing in our community. Let me demonstrate something. She stood and walked toward the conference room door. This door is similar in weight to your home's entrance. Watch. She pulled it open, then released it. The door swung closed at a moderate pace. With proper adjustment, doors close at an appropriate speed. No modification necessary. Our door was adjusted by the previous owner to close quickly for security reasons, I explained. Even with adjustment, the weight. If I may, Deborah interrupted, walking to where Emma sat. Young lady, would you mind showing us your difficulty with the door? Perhaps we can suggest alternatives. Emma looked at me uncertainly, but wheeled forward to the conference room door. She struggled to pull it open while maintaining her chair's position, finally managing with visible effort. As she attempted to wheel through, Deborah reached around her and released the door. The door swung closed, catching the back wheel of Emma's chair. See, Deborah said, the door functions normally. You simply need to move faster. Emma's face flushed red with embarrassment as several residents gasped. Tears welled in her eyes as she struggled to free her chair from the door frame. I moved quickly to help Emma, my heart pounding with suppressed rage. 15 years of professional training kept my voice steady. That was unnecessary and inappropriate. You have just demonstrated exactly why the modification is needed. Deborah returned to her seat, unmoved. The application will be reviewed according to our standard process. Expect a response in 30 days. That evening, Emma was uncharacteristically quiet. When I went to check on her before bed, I found her staring out her window. Dad, she whispered, why did she do that? Why did she make me feel like I was asking for something wrong? I sat beside her, choosing my words carefully. Some people fear difference, Emma, but you have done nothing wrong. We have legal rights to reasonable accommodations under the Americans with Disabilities Act. The following morning, I contacted an ADA compliance specialist who confirmed our rights. The consultation reinforced what I already knew. Deborah's actions were not merely unpleasant but potentially illegal. As I considered our next steps, I found myself instinctively creating a mental profile of Deborah Wilson, just as I would for any subject of interest in my professional work. My home office transformed gradually over the next week. The wall that once held family photos now displayed a carefully constructed timeline of HOA decisions under Deborah Wilson's leadership. After Emma was asleep, I would analyze community newsletters, meeting minutes, and property records, searching for patterns that might reveal vulnerabilities. The threat assessment skills I had honed tracking radical groups now focused on a suburban tyrant. First, I needed to establish baseline behavior patterns. Each morning, I adjusted my running schedule to observe Deborah's routine. She left her house at precisely 7:15 a.m., walking the neighborhood with her clipboard. She documented violations with photographs, her route strategically planned to cover the entire community twice weekly. I created a secure digital database, categorizing each observed interaction between Deborah and community members. Within 2 weeks, a clear behavioral profile emerged. She enforced rules selectively, targeting specific demographics, families with children, elderly residents living alone, and households where English was not the primary language. The HOA meeting minutes revealed another pattern. Under Deborah's 6-year presidency, accommodation requests had been denied at an 87% rate, while aesthetic enhancement proposals from her social circle received expedited approval. The data demonstrated clear bias, but I needed more than statistics to build a compelling case. I began reaching out to neighbors under the guise of community integration. The Garcia family 3 doors down had been fined repeatedly for children's toys visible in their front yard, while the childless couple across from them regularly left golf equipment in the same location without consequence. Mrs. Abernathy, an elderly widow, had been forced to remove her beloved rose garden because it deviated from the approved landscape design, despite having planted it years before the current guidelines were implemented. The most disturbing account came from James Chen, a military veteran who had requested permission to install a small flagpole. She told me flags could only be displayed on approved holidays, he explained as we spoke in his garage, away from prying eyes. When I mentioned my service, she said rules exist precisely because people think they deserve special treatment. Each conversation added another data point to my analysis. Residents spoke in hushed tones, glancing nervously at windows as if Deborah might be listening. Their fear was palpable, a community terrorized not by physical threats, but by the constant anxiety of rule violations and financial penalties. Through public records requests, I obtained copies of all HOA violations issued under Deborah's leadership. The data revealed frequent citations against homes owned by minorities and families with members who had visible disabilities. The pattern was unmistakable to a trained analyst, though perhaps invisible to those without my professional background. I established secure communication channels with affected residents, creating a network of allies willing to share documentation. Mrs. Jenkins provided copies of denied accommodation requests for her husband with Parkinson's disease. The Rodriguez family shared emails showing inconsistent application of rules regarding holiday decorations. Each piece of evidence was cataloged, cross-referenced, and verified for authenticity. The kitchen table became my command center after Emma was in bed. I analyzed financial records, cross-referencing home improvement projects at Deborah's residence with HOA expenditures. Several coincidences emerged. A new fence installation at her property shortly after a special assessment for perimeter security improvements. landscaping upgrades that matched the timing of common area beautification projects. Most residents were unaware that HOA financial records were available upon request. The documents revealed questionable accounting practices, with vague categorizations and undocumented expenses. While not definitively proving misconduct, the pattern suggested financial impropriety that merited further investigation. My most valuable intelligence came from Barbara Winters, the former HOA secretary who had resigned 3 years earlier. We met at a coffee shop 10 miles from the neighborhood to ensure privacy. Her hands trembled slightly as she spoke. "Deborah maintains power through intimidation," Barbara explained. "Board members who question her decisions find themselves targeted for violations. She once told me that people requesting accommodations were simply looking for attention and special treatment." Barbara provided copies of emails in which Deborah explicitly directed selective enforcement of rules. "Focus on the problem houses," one email instructed. "The others maintain community standards and understand their place." As weeks passed, my dossier on Deborah Wilson grew. I applied the same analytical rigor used in my professional assessments, identifying behavioral patterns, motivations, and vulnerabilities. Each piece of evidence was cataloged and cross-referenced, creating an irrefutable record of discriminatory practices. One evening, as I reviewed my findings, Emma wheeled into the office. She glanced at the wall of documents, her expression thoughtful. "Dad, is this about the door?" I hesitated, uncertain how much to share. "It started that way, but this is about ensuring fair treatment for everyone in our community." Emma considered this, then nodded. "Like your work protecting people, just on a smaller scale." Her perception struck me. The tactics differed, but the fundamental mission remained the same: identifying threats to security and well-being, then neutralizing them through strategic intervention. The difference was that this threat lived across the street and wielded a clipboard instead of more traditional weapons. 30 days passed with no response to our accommodation request. According to HOA bylaws, applications not explicitly denied within the review period were considered approved by default. I submitted a formal notice to the board citing this provision, along with our intent to proceed with installation. The response came within hours: an emergency board decision retroactively denying our request, citing insufficient documentation of necessity and potential impact on community aesthetic standards. The timing violated their own procedural rules, providing the first concrete evidence of improper conduct. I filed a formal complaint with the board, meticulously documenting the procedural violations and including a comprehensive legal brief outlining our rights under the Fair Housing Act and Americans with Disabilities Act. The document concluded with a request for a special hearing to address these concerns. The community center was unusually crowded for the special session. Word had spread about our challenge to Deborah's authority, drawing residents who normally avoided HOA meetings. Emma and I arrived early, setting up a small projector and laptop for our presentation. Deborah called the meeting to order, her voice carrying artificial warmth. "We have called this special session to address concerns raised by the Lawson family regarding their accommodation request. Mr. Lawson, you have 15 minutes to present your case." I stood, adjusting my tie, the same ritual I performed before security briefings. "Thank you, Madam President. I would like to address procedural violations in the handling of our accommodation request and broader concerns regarding ADA compliance within our community." The presentation began with a timeline of our application, highlighting the delayed response and retroactive denial. I moved methodically through relevant legal statutes, explaining in clear terms how the board's actions violated federal law. The Americans with Disabilities Act requires reasonable accommodations for persons with disabilities, I explained, displaying the relevant legal text. Our requested modification meets all criteria for reasonableness. It addresses a documented need, imposes minimal aesthetic impact, and would be installed at our own expense. Board members shifted uncomfortably as I presented documented cases of similar requests denied under Deborah's leadership. Richard, who had shown sympathy at the previous meeting, studied the evidence with increasing concern. When I displayed photographs of Deborah demonstrating the door against Emma's wheelchair, murmurs rippled through the audience. This incident not only demonstrated the necessity of our request, but constituted an act of public humiliation against a minor with a disability. Deborah interrupted, her composure slipping. This is becoming a personal attack rather than a discussion of community standards. I am simply presenting factual evidence, I responded calmly. If facts feel like personal attacks, perhaps that warrants reflection. As my presentation concluded, I noticed Deborah whispering urgently to another board member. When I returned to my seat beside Emma, she squeezed my hand, her expression a mixture of pride and anxiety. Deborah cleared her throat. The board appreciates Mr. Lawson's thorough presentation. However, we must consider the precedent that special accommodations create. If we allow one modification, others will demand similar exceptions to our standards. The statement revealed her fundamental misunderstanding of disability law. Before I could respond, Richard spoke up. Madam President, accommodations for disabilities are not special exceptions. They are legal requirements under federal law. The board could face significant liability if we continue to deny reasonable requests. Deborah's face flushed. We all want what is best for the community, but some people use their challenges to manipulate rules that the rest of us follow without complaint. The room fell silent at her words. Emma stiffened beside me, her hand tightening on the armrest of her wheelchair. After tense deliberation, the board voted 3-2 to review our application again, with a decision promised within 2 weeks. It was not the victory we sought, but the public exposure of Deborah's attitudes had shifted the dynamic. Several residents approached us afterward, sharing their own stories of denied accommodations and selective rule enforcement. The following morning, an unmarked envelope appeared in our mailbox. Inside was a printed note. Some neighbors belong. Others should learn their place. Additional violations will be found if you continue this crusade. I photographed the note, added it to my evidence file, and installed a small security camera overlooking our front porch. The implicit threat only reinforced the pattern of intimidation I had documented throughout the community. That evening, Emma developed a severe migraine, a symptom that often accompanied increased stress. As I sat beside her darkened bedroom, applying a cool compress to her forehead, she whispered, "Dad, I do not want to cause trouble for everyone." "You are not causing trouble, Emma," I assured her. "You are standing up for basic rights that protect not just you, but everyone in similar situations." Her condition worsened over the next few days, requiring a visit to her neurologist. The doctor noted increased physical symptoms associated with stress and recommended minimizing conflict in her environment. The medical documentation strengthened our case, but raised the stakes of our confrontation with Deborah. During my investigation, I discovered something significant. Before becoming HOA president, Deborah had worked as an administrator at a private school that had faced a lawsuit over failure to accommodate students with disabilities. The school had settled out of court, but Deborah had left shortly afterward. This explained her particular hostility toward accommodation requests. The revelation transformed my understanding of our opponent. Deborah's resistance was not merely about maintaining community standards. It stemmed from personal history and deep-seated beliefs about disability. She viewed accommodation as capitulation, a perspective likely reinforced by her previous professional experience. As we awaited the board's decision, anonymous violation notices began appearing on our door, citations for imperceptible infractions like excessive dirt on driveway and unapproved shade of white trim paint. Each violation carried potential fines, creating financial pressure designed to force compliance. The pattern was familiar from my professional work, escalating intimidation in response to challenges to authority. What Deborah failed to understand was that such tactics only confirmed the validity of our concerns and strengthened my resolve to address the systemic issues within our community. The next phase required strategic leverage. I requested copies of all HOA financial records for the past 5 years, a right guaranteed to members under state law. The request was met with resistance, but the threat of legal action eventually produced partial documentation. The financial records revealed concerning patterns. HOA dues had increased annually, yet reserves remained stagnant. Maintenance expenses fluctuated wildly, with significant expenditures lacking detailed invoices. Most troubling were administrative expenses that had tripled under Deborah's leadership without corresponding increases in services. I consulted with Patricia Reyes, a disability rights attorney specializing in housing discrimination. We met at her downtown office, where I presented my comprehensive dossier on Deborah Wilson and the HOA's discriminatory practices. Patricia reviewed the evidence methodically, her expression growing increasingly serious. "This goes beyond a single accommodation denial," she observed. "You have documented a pattern of systematic discrimination against protected classes. The financial irregularities suggest potential misappropriation of funds as well." She agreed to represent us, preparing a formal demand letter citing multiple violations of federal housing law and requesting immediate approval of our accommodation, a comprehensive review of all denied accommodation requests during Deborah's tenure, and financial restitution for improperly assessed fines. This letter establishes a legal record of the board's knowledge of these issues, Patricia explained. Any continuing violations after receipt would demonstrate willful noncompliance, significantly increasing potential damages. The certified letter was delivered to each board member's home address rather than the HOA's post office box, ensuring personal receipt and knowledge. The strategy prevented Deborah from intercepting or dismissing the communication. Meanwhile, a local journalist had noticed the increasing tensions in our community. Several residents had mentioned our situation on social media, drawing attention to accessibility issues in homeowners associations. The reporter contacted me requesting an interview about our experience. After careful consideration, I agreed to speak on condition that the focus remain on systemic issues rather than personal conflicts. The resulting article, "Barriers at Home: When HOAs Restrict Accessibility," featured our case alongside similar situations across the county. The publicity brought additional scrutiny to Pinewood Estates and its governance. Deborah's response was predictable based on my behavioral analysis. Rather than addressing the legal concerns directly, she attempted to rally community support through fear. An emergency neighborhood meeting was called without board approval, held at her home to avoid official documentation. I did not attend, but my network of allied neighbors provided detailed accounts. Deborah had framed our accessibility request as the beginning of neighborhood decline, warning that property values would plummet if special interest groups were allowed to modify community standards to suit their personal needs. Several residents reported feeling uncomfortable with her rhetoric, which grew increasingly hostile as the meeting progressed. The division in the community was becoming more pronounced, with many previously silent residents beginning to question Deborah's leadership. My professional background provided unique perspective on Deborah's tactics. She employed classic authoritarian techniques, creating an external threat, fostering dependency through fear, and isolating dissenters. The approach might work against individuals, but it was less effective against coordinated resistance backed by legal expertise. Through public records searches, I discovered something Deborah had carefully concealed: a previous employment discrimination complaint filed against her personally in her role as school administrator. The complaint alleged she had created a hostile environment for a teacher, requiring accommodations for multiple sclerosis. The case had been settled with a non-disclosure agreement, but the court filing remained accessible through county records. The information provided crucial context for her current behavior and established a pattern of discrimination extending beyond our community. Patricia advised that while the prior complaint might not be admissible in legal proceedings, it informed our understanding of what motivated Deborah's actions. I implemented discreet surveillance measures to document ongoing harassment. Motion-activated cameras recorded Deborah photographing our property at unusual hours, measuring our walkway, and once attempting to access our mailbox, a federal offense. Each incident was carefully documented and added to our growing legal file. Late one evening, while reviewing security footage, I noticed something unusual. Deborah had arrived at our property with another board member, pointing at various features of our home. The audio captured her saying, "We need to find something significant enough to justify immediate action before their lawyer causes more trouble." The explicit statement of intent to fabricate violations confirmed what I had suspected. Deborah was not simply enforcing rules, but actively targeting our family. The evidence would be devastating in any legal proceeding. Emma noticed the increasing tension despite my efforts to shield her from the conflict. One evening, she wheeled into my office as I reviewed financial records. "Dad, are we going to have to move again?" The question struck me with unexpected force. "No, Emma, we have every right to be here, with appropriate accommodations for your needs. Sometimes standing up for those rights creates temporary discomfort." She considered this, then said, "At school, we learned about civil rights movements. Is this kind of like that, just smaller?" Her insight was remarkable. "Yes, exactly like that. Systems change when people challenge unfair rules, even when it is difficult." That night, after ensuring Emma was sleeping peacefully, I completed my comprehensive analysis of the HOA under Deborah's leadership. The pattern was clear: selective enforcement, financial discrepancies, and systematic discrimination against protected groups. The evidence was compelling, but the question remained: how best to neutralize the threat without causing collateral damage to the community? The certified letter from our attorney produced exactly the response my analysis had predicted. Rather than addressing the legal concerns directly, Deborah called an emergency board meeting scheduled for a Tuesday afternoon, the precise time she knew I had an unmovable work commitment requiring my presence at headquarters. The board notice cited urgent community safety concerns, requiring immediate attention. The vague language was designed to justify the accelerated timeline and irregular scheduling. My network of allied neighbors alerted me immediately, with Barbara Winters forwarding the confidential agenda that had not been distributed to general members. The document confirmed my suspicions. Item 3 proposed emergency amendments to architectural guidelines specifically prohibiting mechanical door operations visible from the street and establishing expedited enforcement procedures for properties creating community disruption. The timing and specificity left no doubt about the intended target. I contacted Patricia immediately. They are attempting to change the rules retroactively to specifically prohibit our accommodation. This is textbook bad faith, she responded. Their actions strengthen our case, but we need to prevent these amendments from passing. I requested an emergency personal day from work, citing family medical necessity, a legitimate reason given Emma's recent stress-related symptoms. My supervisor, aware of our ongoing situation, approved without hesitation. Rain pounded against windshields in the community center parking lot as board members hurried inside, hunched under umbrellas. Through the window, I could see Deborah distributing documents to the 4 other board members, her expression animated as she gestured emphatically. I waited until the meeting was called to order before entering. The room fell silent as I walked in, carrying a HOA, Terproof portfolio and small projector. Deborah's face registered momentary shock before her features hardened into a practiced smile. Mr. Lawson, this is a closed emergency session. Members will be updated afterward about any decisions affecting the community. As a homeowner directly impacted by agenda items, I have the right to attend under state law governing homeowners associations, I responded, setting up my equipment with deliberate calm. Additionally, our attorney advised me that conducting this meeting without proper notice to affected parties would constitute additional evidence of discriminatory intent. Richard shifted uncomfortably, glancing between Deborah and me. Perhaps we should postpone until proper notice. The agenda items are time-sensitive, Deborah interrupted. We can allow Mr. Lawson to observe, but this remains a board deliberation. I connected my laptop to the projector. Before you proceed, I believe the board should review some relevant information. Without waiting for permission, I displayed the first document, financial records showing unexplained transfers from the HOA maintenance account to a landscaping company registered to Deborah's brother-in-law. The transactions coincided precisely with major renovations to her personal property. These financial irregularities raise serious concerns about conflicts of interest and potential misappropriation of community funds, I explained, maintaining a neutral, analytical tone. The pattern of self-dealing extends to selective enforcement of community guidelines. The second projection showed a statistical analysis of violation notices issued under Deborah's leadership, with clear demographic disparities that could not be explained by random distribution. The data demonstrated systematic targeting of families with disabilities, minorities, and those who had questioned board decisions. Board members leaned forward, examining the evidence with growing concern. The treasurer, a retired accountant, removed his glasses and rubbed his eyes. These financial discrepancies require explanation. Deborah's composure began to crack. This is a distraction from the agenda. Mr. Lawson is attempting to deflect from his own violations by attacking board leadership. I proceeded methodically, displaying security footage showing Deborah photographing our property and attempting to access our mailbox. This constitutes harassment and potentially mail tampering, a federal offense. The final evidence was the most damaging: court records of the previous discrimination complaint against Deborah, establishing a pattern of behavior predating her HOA leadership. The documentation included sworn statements describing remarkably similar tactics to those we had experienced. The board should be aware that continuing to enable discriminatory practices after being informed of these issues creates personal liability for each member, I explained. Federal housing law does not shield individual board members acting in bad faith. Richard cleared his throat. I moved to table the proposed amendments pending legal review of these serious allegations. Second, the treasurer added quickly. Deborah's face flushed crimson. This is a coordinated attack based on manipulated evidence. I have dedicated years to maintaining community standards while certain residents demand special treatment at everyone else's expense. She stood abruptly, papers scattering across the table. You think your government connections make you untouchable. This neighborhood functioned perfectly before families like yours started demanding exceptions to rules everyone else follows. The outburst confirmed every behavioral assessment I had developed. Under pressure, Deborah had revealed her true motivations: not community standards but personal prejudice against those she deemed unworthy of accommodation. The vice president spoke quietly. Deborah, I think we should adjourn to consider these issues privately with our HOA attorney present. You are all being manipulated, she insisted, voice rising. Once we start making exceptions for wheelchairs, what comes next? The entire community will fall apart. Her words hung in the air, recorded by the meeting's official minutes and witnessed by all present. In that moment of unrestrained fury, Deborah had articulated explicit discriminatory intent, the final evidence needed to demonstrate willful violation of federal law. The meeting ended with a unanimous vote to suspend all pending enforcement actions and engage independent counsel to review the evidence I had presented. As board members filed out in stunned silence, Deborah remained seated, staring at the scattered papers before her, the infrastructure of her authority collapsing around her. The transformation of Pinewood Estates began with a single resignation letter. Deborah Wilson stepped down as HOA president 1 week after the emergency meeting, citing personal reasons, rather than acknowledging the evidence against her. The board accepted her resignation without comment and immediately initiated a comprehensive review of association governance. An independent audit confirmed financial irregularities extending beyond what I had initially discovered. The findings were forwarded to appropriate authorities for potential criminal investigation. Residents received formal apologies for improperly assessed fines, with full reimbursement processed within 30 days. Our door modification was approved unanimously by the reconstituted board. The installation took less than a day, a simple mechanical solution to what had become a complex community conflict. The first time Emma pressed the button and the door opened automatically, her smile illuminated our entire home. I can come and go whenever I want now, she said, demonstrating the feature repeatedly with growing confidence. I do not need to wait for help anymore. The board adopted new architectural guidelines explicitly acknowledging the legal right to reasonable accommodations. Previously denied requests were reconsidered under the updated standards, resulting in approval for Mrs. Jenkins' bathroom grab bars, the Chen family's modest ramp, and numerous other modifications that enhanced accessibility throughout the community. A resident advisory committee was established to review community standards, with specific focus on ensuring compliance with federal housing laws. I was asked to serve as committee chair but declined, recommending Mrs. Abernathy instead. Her experience as both a long-time resident and recipient of past discriminatory treatment provided valuable perspective for developing more inclusive policies. The community newsletter, once filled with violation notices and warnings, now highlighted neighborhood achievements and opportunities for involvement. The spring edition featured Emma's science fair project on accessible design, which had won district recognition for innovation. 3 months after Deborah's resignation, I received an unexpected phone call from the president of a neighboring homeowners association. "We have been following the changes in Pinewood Estates," he explained. "Our board is concerned about potential liability under housing laws and would appreciate consultation on reviewing our own policies." Similar requests followed from other communities, creating an unanticipated opportunity to extend the impact of our experience. I developed a simplified compliance framework based on my professional analytical methods, helping associations identify and address potential discrimination in their governance structures. Emma thrived in the transformed community. Her improved access to our home enhanced her independence, reducing fatigue and allowing more energy for school and social activities. The neighborhood children, no longer absorbing their parents' anxieties about rule violations, played freely in common areas where Emma could join them in her wheelchair. On a warm spring afternoon, Pinewood Estates held its first community picnic in 5 years. Residents who had previously avoided each other now shared tables, exchanging stories about their experiences under the previous administration. The atmosphere reflected something I recognized from my professional work: the unique solidarity that emerges when a common threat has been neutralized. As Emma navigated independently through the gathering, stopping to chat with neighbors who now greeted her by name, I reflected on the parallels between my professional and personal experiences. The methodologies developed to identify and counter large-scale threats had proven equally effective against localized tyranny. The skills honed protecting national security now protected something equally precious: my daughter's dignity and her right to equal access. The new HOA president, Richard, approached as I watched Emma from across the lawn. "Your daughter seems to be enjoying her independence," he observed. "That is what security truly means," I replied. "Not rigid enforcement of arbitrary rules, but creating environments where everyone can participate fully." He nodded thoughtfully. "You know, when you first challenged the board, I worried you were overreacting to a simple procedural issue. I never imagined the extent of what was happening." "Most threats operate that way," I explained. "They rely on people dismissing individual incidents rather than recognizing the pattern they form." As the sun began to set over Pinewood Estates, residents lingered rather than hurrying back to their homes. Children played on the community lawn, adults conversed in relaxed groups, and Emma moved freely among them, no longer defined by barriers but by her own capabilities. The transformation reminded me of my fundamental professional belief that true security comes not from walls and restrictions, but from communities built on equal access, mutual respect, and recognition.